On today's episode, we interviewed Elliot Holland, where we talked a lot about Q of E, buyer mistakes, and ultimately as a buyer, right? How to really step up during a transaction and make sure you're getting a proper deal, right? How do you leverage the broker in the transaction to help you do a deal? How do you avoid a lot of the landmines and pitfalls that people hit? And then ultimately, how do you get confident up front so you can set the right expectation for the rest of the transaction? So Casey, what were some of your takeaways?
This is one of the things I'm very passionate in because I've made the mistakes and I'm the one that is living with them, right? And so having that due diligence is critical, but more importantly is having the right person that you can talk to and understand the deals, because at the end of the day, costs are going up. We all want to help transition baby boomer businesses, but they also have certain responsibilities that they've got to do, which is stay on, support us, leave cash, help us grow. And so if we don't have these conversations up front and you don't have the due diligence that then all of a sudden you're going to find yourself in a very tough position. And I'm telling you, I've been in that position for the last 5 years. It's been very challenging. We're going to get through it. But man, I would have much rather done a deal.
The right deal.
The right deal.
Yeah. And so if you're a first-time buyer, this is a great episode to really listen in on and kind of give some thoughts to how are you going to conduct that transaction? How are you going to help ensure that you're buying the deal that you think you're buying?
Hey guys, go ahead and just pause the podcast for a second. When you're buying a business, you need to ensure the financial health of the company. The quality of earnings is mission critical. It doesn't matter what size business you're buying. Patrick O'Connell Advisory Group, they're dynamic. They do a great job. They're going to look over your shoulder. They're going to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And this guy's done over 200 buyers successfully, just like you. So reach out to him. And it's O'ConnellAdvisoryGroup.com. Click the link in our show notes. Can't live without this.
Hey, Elliot, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you on. So for the audience, you want to share who you are and what you do?
Elliot Holland. I run Guardian Due Diligence and the Business Buyer Masterclass. With Guardian Due Diligence, I do financial diligence, a mini audit product called Equality of Earnings, specifically for people who are buying small businesses to make sure the numbers are what they're actually supposed to be so you can pay those high prices. And then on the mastermind side, I am helping first-time buyers get off the sidelines and into the game of closing a deal.
All right. Amazing. And then, this is the horsepower you want to bring, right, whenever you're doing a deal. So for those listeners out there, this is actually, I think, an important topic, and it's about how do you avoid the landmines, right? I think a lot of people are scared to buy business because sometimes they get a set of financials. They're like, I don't even know what I'm looking at, or how do I understand this? And to be honest, if you're buying a business first, you do need to go get a little bit of financial literacy because you need to understand at least the basics, right? But I think, where due diligence is, it's kind of where rubber meets the road of like, how do you validate what you've been given, right, at a more detailed, intimate level. And so I think it's going to be a lot of just nuggets for people to think about as you're buying a business, what are some of the things to look for? And
then we're going to make it simple and fun. So here's the thing about it for me. If you have a working knowledge of a P&L statement, you're actually armed enough to do a deal with a provider like me to help you understand the financials. So the thing is, one of the big things that I do is take complex accounting language and EBITDA, working capital, all that kind of stuff, and just help people put it into a package where they can make a deal decision. And so I don't want anybody to get scared of what we're talking about today. It's just, if they say it's $1 million of EBITDA, you should pay 4 times. Is it $1 million of EBITDA, and should you pay 4 times?
Yeah. And I think, Elliot, you're a private equity guy, so you know how to distill it down and dumb it down, so to speak, right, to the language of what your clients are actually wanting to ask.
That's it. So frankly, like even EBITDA is just profit. So, a lot of these terms are sort of a bit more complicated than they need to be. So we try to have fun with that and also just invite people to recognize it's just revenue minus cost is profit. That's basically EBITDA.
In saying that, I'm not so early in my days. So in 2019, when I stepped into this side of the business, learning all the good stuff, EBITDA, that was how I looked at everything. I honestly, man, am not a big fan of EBITDA. I think that, like for instance, we bought a manufacturing company. Why am I adding back depreciation? Like it is a real cost. Now that I look at it, but we looked at EBITDA, and it's like, it's real, it's not something it's not phantom income that they keep talking about. No, my CapEx requirement is severe, and I should have bought on, what is it? EBIT, not EBITDA,
Yes. Yep.
So it's like, but I didn't know that, right? So I get in the game. So if I have a guy like you on my team, right, Those are the
You'll
kind of
know that.
conversations I'm having, because that's what you're going to be saying to me. You're going to be like, hey, Casey, depreciation isn't something that you just get like it's a real cost.
Great point. So one of the things that happens in this more frothy market, right, where a lot of people are coming in thinking it's easy, and I love that it's open to anyone, but you still got to get good deals done. You're right. In asset heavy businesses, manufacturing, trucking is even worse. That depreciation, you almost have to get it out of there because you're going to have to spend CapEx to get the assets and keep them going. And so there's certain businesses that EBITDA is absolutely terrible for. Manufacturing is one of them, and you might not know.
I didn't, and Feras didn't either. So it was, but you live, you learn, and you take your bumps on the pieces. But the businesses that we're doing now, I mean, it is like, and Ben's actually running our podcast right now, Bluta, but he the other day he's like, man, you're just like this. You're changing your whole idea on cash. And I'm like, man, because after you've bought a couple of these companies, you're gonna be out of cash in the first year to 18 months. It's insane. So it's like, let's put a 13 weeks in. Let's get the cash management right off the bat. Yep. And so these are the things that I think like a great advisor like you would do is say, hey guys, this is cash. It's going to get sucked out. You've got debt service. You've got everything going to hit you.
So EBITDA is just used as an assumption of cash flow. When you make an investment, real estate, business, whatever, you make an investment of X to get the cash flow. You put the cash flow in the bank. You cannot spend EBITDA at Walmart. So the first thing is the reason we use EBITDA is because it's a proxy for what Casey's saying, which is cash flow. The other thing is you run out of cash in 12 to 18 months if you don't buy a terrible business at a terrible price. You run out of cash in 30 days if you overpay by 50%, which is happening a lot of times in the marketplace currently because, let's face it, with a lot more buyers than great businesses to sell, brokers and sellers are putting anything out there, any crazy story, any crazy multiple. And because there's a lot of first-time buyers out here, I wouldn't expect them to know, but you can still go bankrupt making bad deals if you don't know. That's why doing financial due diligence, making sure at least you read up and understand what kind of assets you're buying, mission critical.
Yeah, and maybe for listeners too, people are asking what's the point of EBITDA, right? But I guess, Elliot, I thought you were going to say something that you did, and maybe I'll say it the way I look at it is it's a way to normalize different businesses, right? How do you compare the manufacturing business to the software company to, the label maker, right? They're all very different, but it's a way to get some sort of normalization between them. And I think for those that still don't understand that, it's actually a lot like real estate, right? Real estate, you have cap rates. And so what is a cap rate? It's really kind of the same thing as an EBITDA, right? Where you've removed a lot of the noise so you can compare what is the Walgreen piece of real estate. How does that compare to an apartment that compares to a manufacturing industrial facility, right? Very different types of assets and a way to get consistency. So as a buyer and investor, you can compare them. And so that's the point of EBITDA. But again, that's very high up in the financial stack, right? There's still a lot of stuff below the line that you need to be very, very conscious of and what impact it has on the business.
It also allows more everyday folks to play the game because EBITDA can be calculated on a single financial statement, the income statement, which most people understand the best. Yeah. So it normalizes different companies from a profit perspective. It also allows you to look at the income statement, go to EBIT, add DNA, and be at the number that you're multiplying the multiple on to get the valuation. So it's that too.
Yeah.
And I imagine, Elliot, you're seeing in the, more of the small business side, when you look at those deals, you probably got a ton of seller discretionary earning, right? You've got sellers taking tons of money out of the business for different things. And we literally just had a podcast earlier in this, and the guy was talking about his first business. They were like, we will not buy something that has a bunch of ad backs from
the seller.
From the seller.
Seller was
he's like, we won't
hair transplants in the business. And
he's like, he goes, we're not even looking at them. We're like, literally, if it does a bunch of ad backs, we're considering the seller as not a good financial steward of the business. So what are your thoughts when you see these things?
So I hate SDE, but it's market-based, so you can't hate it worse than you want to get a deal done. So seller's discretionary earnings is not only adding back depreciation, amortization, and these add backs, which are just personal expenses that sellers run through their business. But now you're adding back one owner's salary. And the assumption is it's for a smaller business where a buyer is going to take over the CEO role. So they're basically pushing the seller out and taking that role. but it essentially applies the same multiples as before that were applied towards a lower number, EBITDA. Now you add $100,000 salary and you're using the same 4x multiple on SDE. And frankly, where people are really getting out of hand, Casey, is now there's 3 owners in the business. Let's say it's us 3. So now we're not adding back 1 salary, we're adding back 3, and we're seeing if the buyer's smart enough to catch it.
Yeah, and that's why you bring in an Elliot, right, to help you kind of understand what those are. And so, Elliot, maybe for the listeners, right, when is the right time to bring you in? And maybe give some people just some examples of landmines that you had customers kind of encounter and, you had to kind of help them navigate them or, solve them or back out of a deal maybe.
Yep. I should be your first call after you get a signed letter of intent. For 99% of people, as soon as you get your signed letter of intent, you typically have 30 to 45 days, both in your letter of intent, but also in your fundraising timeline to do a quality of earnings. And if you wait too long, you're going to push your deal process back, upset your seller, get kicked out of transactions. So as soon as you get an LOI, call me, and I'm really easy to connect with on my website. But now let's get into some war stories.
Yeah,
that's what everybody likes.
And for the record, my hope is if, Casey gets an LOI, I'm his first call, and then you could be the second caller, right?
That works.
We got to get excited about getting an LOI first.
No, but you know what is important, though, just to kind of bring it to the listeners, is you've got to have a team. There are no rewards for doing this by yourself. In fact,
no.
You may be a great deal generator. You may be able to go find a deal, but trust me, you're 100% going to miss something in the financials, right? And then you do not want to quarterback your own purchase and sale agreement. You like all of this stuff. You want to get a great team around you.
I think about this, Casey. So people always use Warren Buffett as the most brilliant investor out there. He gets QOEs. So you're trying to go do something, do it yourself, that some of the greatest investors go get help on. Just think about that. You smarter than Warren Buffett? No way. No. Get help.
Absolutely.
So I'll talk about some stories. So here's the thing that you have to understand. Because it's the cap rate similar thing, a multiple. So now what I'm saying is if I tell somebody that I have $1 million of profit as a seller, Casey to buy my business is going to multiply that times about 4. What that means is each fake dollar of EBITDA that I can get into there, I don't get $1 back for it, I get 4. So this creates an environment where even normally reasonable, integrity-filled people will tell a story because they're getting 4x their story back in a return. Let me give you a couple of examples. I was doing a quality earnings for a customer who was buying a security company, like manned security outside of stadiums, basketball games, whatever. And the broker claimed to be a special finance guy, and so it felt comfortable with the buyer was smart enough to get a quality of earnings. So there was about $1 million of cash flow in this business when they presented it. So as we're doing our quality of earnings, one of the things that we do is say, hey, we need to test some of the invoices to make sure that there's invoices to match all of this revenue. All of these, it's in paper, all these boxes, I can't send it. You want 78 boxes in the mail, blah, 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 excuses, right? So finally, we're saying, hey, just pick 5 invoices out of there and we'll test those. When they wouldn't do that, I told my client, I'm like, your seller went into the bank, deposited $1 million, and is hoping that you didn't check so they can call that revenue. 100% of that revenue drops to the bottom line in EBITDA, and you would have bought a break-even business for $4 million. Talk about going to the poorhouse.
Oh, right. My God. That's incredibly. I'm glad you found that. But I bet that's happening more than we know.
A lot more than you know. It's getting scary. And people always say I'm a fear monger and I'm just making everybody think it's scary. I'm seeing these deals. I do 40 to 50 deals a year. And right now, brokers and sellers know that it's very likely they're going to find a sucker. Somebody's not going to do diligence. Somebody's going to do it yourself. Somebody's going to try to call 2 or 3 full-time accounting friends like, hey, on the weekends, can you kick through these financials for me? And so the amount of stuff that's going on is crazy. I'll give you another one at the intersection of due diligence and accounting QOE. So I was working with somebody who was buying a fabrication business, right? So they fabricated metal and gave it to sort of OEM manufacturers, washing machines, dryers, that kind of thing. Well, the seller was selling the fabrication business, but they actually were also supplying the business. They had another business that had very similar SKUs to the one business that they were selling to, different end-use customers. And then they also had a business that was one of the customers of the business. So you guys might not have followed me, but everything around this business was still owned by the seller, which means that you have complete situation where the seller can increase the input price, decrease the price he's willing to pay, compete with you without you even being able to write a non-compete that would restrict him. And so before we even got into the numbers, I told my client, you can't buy this business because there's no profit in it. The seller will suck it out the day that you buy this thing. But those are diligence things that people don't catch.
Yeah, and those aren't even Q of E things, right?
No, that's not
those
Q of
are
E.
just, hey, like bouncing ideas off of somebody that's not affiliated with the transaction and be like, bro, like slow down, right? Like, step back and look at the bigger picture here, right? And again, that's going back to Casey's point. That's the value of partners. I mean, heck, even prior to this podcast, Casey and I were just talking through, just kind of like one of the deals that we have going on and just talking it through out loud, right? We both know the mechanics of the deal, but having the back and forth banter helps you identify areas that weren't as apparent up front, right? So that's the value of people around you to talk through things, right? And sometimes you get really excited about a deal, you want to do the deal, so you find, you look for every reason to say yes versus like, what are the reasons to say no?
So Elliot, I am a casualty of not doing a Q of E. The first company I bought, if I would have called you and said, hey, just take a look, you would have probably done a couple Google searches. You would have looked, you would have said, hey, did you know that their second largest customer just went bankrupt a month before you closed? And you would have known that, right? You would have been like, Casey, like, did you, but I was so busy with the financing. I was working with the attorneys. I didn't go back and I had already done all this due diligence 4 months before. Like I didn't keep checking and looking. And so I was right there, right? We closed in October 2019. Oil prices crashed in half. I would have seen that if I would have had an advisor. The point of the matter is I'm one of those that I'm like, I kick myself. I'm like, God dang it. So for any of those listeners that haven't thought of, spending that money, it's the best money you're going to spend. Even if he tells you, hey, it's not going to be worth it. Guess what? It's best money you spent.
Oh gosh, it's more valuable for my clients that walk away from bankruptcy than even the folks that actually get 20% or 40% returns on their money in a good deal. Think about that. Avoiding 10 years of just disdain. I mean, you got to be smart. And then here's the other thing. You got to realize the smartest buyers, not just Warren Buffett, but the smartest buyers in the small deal market under $10 million. So my friends off of Wall Street doing private equity, a mutual friend that's speaking at your conference, these are brilliant deal people that still get quality of earnings and still have partners on their deal. So the concept that you can do it by yourself is just crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so maybe let me ask you this, Elliot. What is some of the, outside of just not getting QOV, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen your clients make that did end up transacting? And what was it?
Giving up too much leverage up front. It's unfortunate that for first-time buyers, you're asked to do a very advanced negotiation, typically with people who are older than you, more experienced than you at the letter of intent phase and in the first couple of weeks after the letter of intent. And a lot of people don't understand that because they don't have good partners, guys, saying that this is way out of market or this isn't something you have to do. You're being told to do this, but it's not really normal. You give up so much leverage pre-LOI and immediately post that when it comes time to negotiate the purchase agreement, that 50 to 90 page humdinger at the end, you're getting railroaded. So I think that's one huge mistake. I'm gonna throw some of my Ivy League MBA friends under the bus. I'm one of them, so it's us. We get the letter of intent signed. A lot of people are part-time searching, so they got a full-time job taking up 60 hours a week, and they're like, I'm gonna kick the tires myself. Yep. So 1 week passes, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. Then I get a call like, hey, Elliot, can you do a quality of earnings in 2 weeks? Because my seller doesn't think I have any money and I'm behind. I didn't get all the quality of earnings stuff that I wanted done on myself. So can you do this in 2 weeks? And we can't. And so now the 6 weeks that you kind of kicked the tires yourself and probably didn't do anything of significance, you delayed everything in your deal. And now your seller is like, hold on, man, 6 weeks and now you're asking for QuickBooks and that kind of thing. They're going to kick you out of the process. The other thing people mess up on, and this is a bit nuanced, but I think this will be fun to talk about. They dislike the business broker so much that they don't use the business broker for some of the best things that they can use that person for. Let me give you an example.
Okay, yeah.
So the business broker is a very important person in the transaction because they are the buffer in between you and the seller. Halfway through the deal, crazy enough, the broker is trying to close the deal. That's what he was signed on to do by the seller. So at times he has to translate something that the buyer needs to tell the seller into language the seller will understand because the buyer can't say it directly. For instance, a lot of my clients get in situations where like bank statements are just late and you're like a month from closing, you're still missing 2 bank statements. You got to call the broker and say, hey, man, get that gosh darn seller on the phone, get those freaking bank statements because no deal is closing without it. I'm tired of waiting. If they're not in my hands by tomorrow at 5 p.m., I'm walking from the deal and you're losing your money. Go do your job, earn your commission. Now, a lot of people are like, whoa, that's forceful, Elliot. Why are you so direct? When we're talking about $1 million deals, guys, the broker may be a little perturbed at you in a second, but when he gets that check on commission, he'll be very happy you pushed that button. So you got to use these folks for the actual benefit that you get out of them. Did that make sense, guys?
No, it makes huge sense because those guys they're not getting realtor commissions. They're not getting 3%. They're getting in the small market, they're getting up to 10%.
Yeah,
that's a big check on $1 million deal. They better work their ass off, right?
And you said something really important I want to hone in on for people. It's, the seller is the person that is hiring the broker, right? So the broker represents the seller. So at the beginning of the process, the broker is trying to find a buyer. But as the process is halfway through, really the broker, he represents the seller, but he's there to help you get the deal done. Right. Because the last thing the broker wants is for this deal to start all back over because, that's going to be another 9 months. Right. These things don't move fast. There's a lot of, if it's a qualified buyer, you're doing your part and, they're there to almost represent you indirectly. Right. And even a better example, I think, Elliot, than the one that you said, it's the broker can convey the hard or complicated message. Right. Getting statements is easy, but, something along the lines of like, hey, we have to retrade this deal because this, and this, we went and validated this earned back. I need a reduction in the price of $500,000. Hard pill to swallow.
Or this other one, I'll give you one. Hey, the seller's wife is the CFO and she's getting all of our data a week or 2 late. You need to tell the seller to get his wife in order.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so, good luck on that.
So
one.
you don't want to sell her. You don't want to, as a buyer, you don't want to say that to the seller directly, but guess what? That's what the broker's there for. And so
that's what the deal needs, right? Or like, hey, that general manager, we know he has a habit, so we have to retrade the deal because we're okay with the risk, but it's going to be a bigger seller note. There's a bunch of nuanced, kind of grimy things that you got to sometimes deal with in deals that leverage that broker, right? Also, here's another one. So first is leverage the broker. Also, a lot of my first-time buyers assume that when they tell the broker something, that exact message without any edits made it directly to the seller. So they'll say, oh, I told the seller, whoop-de-whoop, whoop, whoop. And I'm like, there's no way you told the seller that. You told the broker, I told the broker to go tell the seller. I'm like, that's a totally different thing. So you got to be careful, too. You talk about mistakes. Just like in any other communication, there's that telephone game. You tell the broker one thing, they're going to translate it, and sometimes translate it very well, sometimes translate it very poorly. You have to know that once you have that buffer, it can benefit you, but it can also be to your detriment.
Yeah. So one of the things that I read the other day on LinkedIn, and I totally disagreed from it, right? It was a broker or somebody, I didn't know who exactly it was, but someone I follow on LinkedIn, and they were talking about networking capital. And what their point was is they said that in the smaller deals, you don't even want to talk to the seller about networking capital because it should be a cash-free, debt-free deal. And I'm like, what? I'm like, that should be like your first conversation because who buys the business without networking capital? And Elliot, that this is like the number one thing that kills deals. I'm sure it is because owners think it's their money. And so how do you convey that to your newbies that are buying, how to have that conversation?
So I'm going to start with a statement and then answer your question. We have to recognize that, for instance, I've been in small deals for 15 years. Some people have been in this for 20. Some people have been in it for 4 months. So a lot of people who are saying these things on LinkedIn and Twitter have been in it 2 years. And they're just representing this very narrow part of the market where a lot of BS is happening because there's a lot more buyers than great deals. You can't listen to them around 10-year advice. And if you're going to buy a business, you're going to be in it 10 years. So some of these people are just talking way outside of their understanding. Yep. Now, let me answer your question. On a working capital basis, when you value a business at a multiple of EBITDA, that includes working capital. Debt-free, cash-free is something totally different. And we can get into that in a second if you want to. But if you don't have enough working capital in the business, the only way you go bankrupt is you run out of cash. So you can have a bad month, a bad year, but if you have enough working capital in the business, you can weather the storm. Now, what's happening is a lot of sellers are signing letters of intent to say, hey, I will leave normal working capital in the business, but here's what's happening. They're getting to the end and like, oh, wait, working capital is stuff I sold that I didn't get paid on yet? Oh, no, I'm keeping that. And they're reneging. And so the thing that I tell people, and this is my deal lens, not my accounting lens, is that be prepared for sellers to retrade on working capital, but do not allow it to go to zero. Do not allow a broker to tell you that 100% of the working capital should come from some working capital additional debt that you're going to get from the bank. No. That seller should be leaving some working capital in that business.
So, Elliot, this is when I'm meeting with a seller, like I'm having two conversations up front, right? We are going to ask for a seller carry. So if you're not interested in carrying paper, and I'm going to ask for at least 50%, I'll start there.
Yep.
I need you to, because look, SBA rates, there's a couple things that are actually happening. Yep. Cost of shit is going up.
Yep.
So if the seller sells it to me today and electricity cost doubles tomorrow, and electricity is my fourth largest bill, I have not yet bought a company where my insurance rates did not go up 20%. So I'm telling them right up front, hey, unless you have a different kind of business, costs are going through the roof. And if I've got to carry cost at 10% with SBA or any other lender, it's just not going to make sense. And I always start there. Now, if we negotiate back and forth, I want to have that conversation at the beginning. The other one I have is I explain what net working capital is right there. I'm like, it is fuel to run the business. So, whatever, so we were talking to a guy in a recycling company and they do recycling. So when they buy goods, they're paying cash, right?
Yep.
So he was churning $1 million. Ben, you remember this one. He was churning $1 million a month in buying raw goods and flipping it. Guys bring them stuff, they pay cash. So I was sitting in the meeting, first meeting with the broker. We drove up to Dallas, and right about midway through, I told him, I said, hey, you know that the cash that you're utilizing to buy goods stays with the business.
Right.
And man, you should have seen his face. He was like, absolutely not. And I said, I'm telling you, that is a tool that you're using to buy goods and services. That is not your cash. That is the company's cash. And that allows you to fuel your business. So I'm sorry. And man, even the broker was just like that. Well, let's have this conversation later. I was like, no, let's get to the hard stuff first. Right. If you can't get over your fact that your $1 million is your vehicle, I go, so, but that's what I do. And I may walk out with nothing, but at least I'm not dealing with that at a term sheet or a LOI.
Casey's great on first dates. Trust me.
I can tell he's stellar. So
I've done this so many times. It's like you get to the LOI, you've invested 45 days, and then all of a sudden you write in there, we should get, an appropriate amount of net working capital. And the same thing you just said, the guy has no clue what that means. No clue.
And unfortunately in that, the broker will know, but claim that they don't. So what I'll say, because I speak to first-time buyers and more experienced, the more experienced buyers are going to actually go into deals just like Casey. The first-time buyers is going to be harder for you to come that strong. You don't have it in you yet. Now try to. You should have the same conversation the same way. But get as much as you can. You should understand that this is like an aspirational place where you should get to when you've done a bunch of deals and lost some money and should have done something different. Don't be a complete softie. That's what I'm seeing is probably the biggest risk is like you're letting working capital go. You're letting the seller note go. Yeah. And now you have no recourse. That's what we should talk about, guys.
That's the theme.
We'll talk about that next.
That's the theme of this, right? Is, you in these transactions, you can't be a softie with certain things, right? Like the broker is not a person you want to be timid with, right? They're there to get the deal done. You be frank with them, let them go do the messages. Yes, you may have a very strong-willed seller and you have to kind of manage that. But again, you're basically, I mean, there's a phrase that I heard that I really liked a couple of weeks ago, which is the problems you're dealing with today are based on decisions you made 3 to 5 years ago.
That's it.
So, don't set yourself up for 5 years of headache by not getting the deal done correctly. Like Casey's actually a perfect example.
I'm doing it right now. It's painful.
It's important.
But that's what I want people to listen to. Yeah. This guy's still doing deals, but he screwed up on the first one. He's trying to tell you don't screw up the same way he did. The reason you listen to podcasts or any kind of education is so you can actually learn from other people's mistakes so you can at least make different ones.
Yep.
So I channel, you're going to laugh, it's totally cheesy, but I channel Harvey Specter when I go into do deals. And I'm not the asshole one, but I'm talking about that ability to just articulate and communicate exactly what you want up front. Because if we can't get through that at the beginning, there's no need for us to spend the next 3 months together.
Absolutely right. And it's okay if the seller's too rigid for you to be a buyer. You're going to let that pass and let some of these folks who are a little bit softer take that pill, right? You're doing good deals. People should ascribe to do good deals. And if the good deal requires tough conversations. Let me give you another mental concept there. So when you're telling a seller, hey, I need $500,000 of working capital. I need a 20% seller note, call it $500,000. And I'm going to come deliver $3 million in a Brinks truck in 3 months. The person who can do that, the person who's strong enough to do that, do you think they're not strong enough to have a tough discussion at the beginning? So by being soft at the beginning, what you're actually communicating psychologically is I'm unlikely to be the person to deliver the Brinks truck in 3 months. I'm unlikely to deliver your seller note. And so this isn't about this is about respect. It's about being formidable as a buyer. And that's why I talked about 20 minutes ago. A lot of people give way too much leverage at the LOI phase.
So last thing before we jump to our questions. So talk to us about that, what you meant by leverage with the seller. You said we need to talk about that. That is a big, recourse. I knew you were going recourse.
Yep. So you buy a used car, drive it off the lot, you can't take it back.
Nope.
So all your diligence has to happen before you buy the business. But recourse is the fact that you have this legal document. All people are, well, it's in the legal document, so I'm protected. No. So anything in the legal document, to get recourse out of it, you have to go litigate it, pay a cost, spend time. If that seller is still integral and you learn in the business, piss your seller off. You should be doing sales and marketing. You're doing legal doc reading. And very few people recover anything through that process. So when recourse is discussed, it's sort of that seller note is your recourse. You should be able to set off that seller note for breaches of reps and warranties, but you should know that seller note and your ability to reduce it is probably your only real recourse in this transaction. So when people are like, oh, this seller won't accept the seller note, what they're saying is this seller wants no recourse on the selling of their business. So you got to understand that.
I would tell you to walk. Me personally, if I am doing a deal and the seller's not willing to carry paper, I'm walking, period.
And you should walk. 100% of people should walk.
They're telling
me something that they're done, or hey, I'll stay on for a year. Bullshit. You're not staying on for a year. You're going to sell it. 90 days later, you're going to be an asshole and you're going to walk with your top sales guy. I mean, whatever it is, it happens.
Yeah. You can, and like all that stuff that people put into the document, very little of it can you actually hold somebody accountable if the day after the close, they run away. And so your way to hold them accountable is to hold the paper. And that may be the only kind of formidable reason to do it, but it's mission critical. If you listen to some of these stories of people who failed in their transactions, so many of them went soft on the seller note.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Woo. Good stuff, man. I think we beat up some good stuff. I hope our listeners listened and got some good things. And we wish, Elliot, you were coming to our conference here in May coming up, but we're going to get you at the next one in Chicago.
That's right.
All right, so let's jump into our rocket round. This is when we ask our guests 3 important questions. All right, Elliot, what do you like to do in your free time?
I love music, man. So going to a good concert is something I love to do.
Nice.
All right, good idea. Next up, most memorable moment in your business journey.
Yeah, so when I started realizing how well I could market on digital marketing in a way where most people had done like steak dinners and golf outings, when I really started dialing on the digital marketing opportunity is one of the most incredible moments in my business because it allows me to speak to my audience kind of very specifically without having to do a bunch of physical in-person stuff that really is inefficient.
I don't know, man. I only talk well in front of a steak, so that's just me personally.
All right. And what is your favorite tool or resource?
My CRM, HubSpot, how I keep track of all my clients, resources, vendors, and all the rest, just having like almost like a second brain. That resource is mission critical for me.
That's awesome.
Perfect.
That's why you're growing a great business, man. Yeah. And then lastly, before I jump off, I had a question for you. So one of the times when I back in the early days when I'd reached out to you, sent me like a due diligence list that you have, and it was a pretty thorough, thick spreadsheet, right? And it was intimidating. So I want you to just share the listeners, because I want them to know that like when you get your due diligence list, right, from anybody doing a QOV, it's a lot of information, right? Yes. So what is it's that feeling that if I go back to my seller and ask for all of this, they're going to walk, right? Yep. So how do I overcome that objection? What's that last little tidbit there?
You have to remind the seller that although they've made $10,000 investments for 20 years, day to day, they've never made a $3 million single day investment with 90% leverage. So if you were going to do this, or you were going to suggest your kid were going to do this acquisition, you would want them to have this data. This is the same data I need from you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Incredible way to wrap up, man.
Perfect.
Elliot, thank you for joining us.
And how can people get a hold of you?
Thanks for having me. So go to guardianduediligence.com or go to YouTube and just type in Guardian Due Diligence. My YouTube is probably my number one social channel, and go check me out there.
Perfect. And we'll put it in the show notes. Elliot, thank you very much.
Man, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the M&A Launchpad Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's podcast and would like to support us, please leave us a rating and a review after you listen. I'm Casey Minshew, and I look forward to talking with you next week.